Hey everyone, I bet you didn't expect to see me come back this fast, but as I said in the last video, I'm just going to go over the upcoming 10.1 talent changes and what it means for how the spec looks going forward. First, I'm going to go over each of the individual talent changes, what's important and what you need to keep in mind, and then I'm going to take a more comprehensive look at what that means for both the Elementalist and physical build archetypes going into the patch for different situations. So let's jump straight in. Looking at the tree, nothing has moved, but there's definitely some things that have changed. First and foremost, Wind Fury Weapon received a 50% buff alongside a nerf to Forceful Winds to even it out, while at the same time, Elemental Weapons now requires Imbues active to activate the bonus. All in all, it's a small boost to both builds with a slight leaning to Elementalist since it doesn't suffer the penalty from the Forceful hit, but the important thing here is it kills off any Imbulus builds that you've been using, so no more cheating it by replacing it for a rune to squeeze out an extra talent point, since the benefit from Elemental Weapons is just too good to give up no matter the setup. Next, Fire Nova has had its damage converted to Flame Strike damage, making it multi-school between fire and physical. This, in part, gives it a solid amount of extra synergy with the set bonus, as it currently double dips with the 4-piece, but more importantly, it gives physical builds a much better option for AoE. Though it's nothing special for Elementalist that plays Hailstorm usually, and though it's more serviceable than it was for other reasons, physical now being able to activate it with the base Feral Spirit buffs and the legacy of the Frost Witch effect that amplify physical damage makes a meaningful difference to its previously lacking AoE tools. With all the multipliers, set bonus included, this becomes a massive contributor to your AoE DPS and Maelstrom generation, but it still has the downside of being low value for single target, making it more specialized. I expect this alone is enough to bring physical back to the table from where it was, but what comes next are the really important changes. The entire leaf beneath Ascendance has been improved with added passives that are non-conditional with the effect being active, the first of which being static accumulation. On top of the Maelstrom generation during Ascendance, any and all Lightning Bolt or Chain Lightning casts have a 10/20% chance to refund all Maelstrom spent immediately. That means if you fire off a 10-stack bolt and then it procs, you're straight back to 10 and you can machine gun another right away. Think Aftershock for Elemental. This is a lot similar in playstyle, and it drastically improves your overall Maelstrom generation, albeit in a more random way than almost any other talent on the tree. On top of that, all of these stacks also count for your Witch Doctors, CDR, and Wolves, resetting them even more frequently than they already are. This pairs alongside the addition to Thorum's Invocation, which now also passively increases Lightning Bolt and Chain Lightning damage by a flat 20% at all times, further leaning into the lightning damage portion of our toolkit, including your Ascendance windows from Thorum's itself, or if you happen to spend a cheeky point on Naked Primordial Wave. Considering the new 4-piece we're working with now also heavily incentivized casting some Chain Lightnings rotationally that guarantee a refund, even in single target, that also hit extremely hard, this works in almost every build and especially for physical, drastically improving the AoE profile alongside a lot of single target as well. This often raises Chain Lightning to the top of your damage sources, so you can really feel how impactful these two changes are in tandem, and it also has some relatively strong implications for single target as well. That said, while the stated intent of the change seemed to be to pull away from having to have you play Elemental Blast in any single target situation, it still seems pretty likely that we're going to be playing it regardless of build, though the gap is a little bit smaller for physical where Lightning still has those refunds at play and you don't have Elemental Spirits talented to boost it up. What that means then, and something that some people have already started to notice on the PTR, is that some builds have an unpleasant situation where there are 3 separate Maelstrom spenders that all have their own conditions and priorities sharing a very limited resource. That Chain Lightning cast from the 4-piece also reset the priming on Thorum's, and that Thorum's itself, when it triggers, munches any set stacks for a maximum of 5-stack Chain Lightning isn't a wonderful situation, but we'll see how that plays out in actual gameplay on live. What these changes do overall, though, and something that I really appreciate, is it raises the value of Maelstrom even higher than it already was, while also at the same time providing additional avenues to generate it so you don't feel like you lost anything. It also fixed what I personally hated the most about this section of the tree, which is that when DRE procs decide to go AFK and do its taxes or something, 4 of your talent points just disappear into the ether, and that sucked. I'll be talking a bit more about the implications of all of this for the different builds in that section after this, but since I mentioned deeply rooted elements, a quick explanation of that change is also worth touching on for anyone who's wondering. Thanks to Blood Mallet and the Elemental guys over at Storm Earth and Lava, bearing in mind that the activation behavior is shared between all specs, the new proc behavior appears to be an ever-increasing chance each time you roll the dice with Storm Strike that resets with each activation, with a double failure chance after each success to block back-to-back activations. This means that overall consistency will go up while wild swings will go down, and those long 100 Storm Strike chains where you never get any procs are going away completely. While in isolation this is, yes, a nerf, pairing it with the two supporting talents that just got massively buffed brings it more in line as a build, and if anything, going into the patch despite this, you will probably see an increase in your overall damage. It does mean that you're going to have less situations where you do horrific tank level DPS because you had proc droughts, but it does come at the cost of removing the 1 in a million god roll pulls. Personally, while I know that some people did enjoy those, I found the swings way too extreme, and that this still keeps some of the big moments happening that are out of your control. It does inject a bit more excitement and agency into the gameplay for physical, and it stops it being all about fishing for procs. It also pulls back on some of the all-or-nothing nature of the RNG, but it still keeps some dopamine hits in with the static accumulation refunds, so I think this is a healthy compromise, and I'm hoping that what it mostly pulls back on is that feeling that you made the wrong choice before you even pulled the boss, but we'll see how it plays out and how people feel when it hits live. So, with all that out of the way, before I get started, I'm going to start with a big, fat, double underlined, glowing neon red disclaimer here for anyone watching down the line that this is purely speculation from PTR. That means if you're watching this 2 months from now and thinking about using this as a guide, chances are some of it will have aged out and it won't be exactly like what you're seeing happening on live. As always, the guides on Icy Veins and Wowhead that I write will be kept much more relevant as time goes on and shift depending on what turns out to be dominant when it reaches everyone's hands. So please, please, pretty please read those and bear that in mind before the next section. When it comes to builds, both archetypes look to still have a strong showing for different situations, though whether it really should be called physical anymore is another question considering how much is just lightning. And I'll be adding import strings in the description below for all of the builds used in the gameplay showcases on the right side if you're looking for those and want to try them out. So starting off with Elementalist, on the screen is a breakdown of the pathway showing core talents in blue that should always be taken, AoE picks in green, single target picks in red, and flex skills that can be used in either situation in orange. The core of Elementalist that's always been there since launch remains mostly the same, building around the Hailstorm package at the top and emphasizing Lava Lash as the main rotational strike, picking up all the nodes on the far right. Most of what you've seen up to now in Dragonflight still rings true in terms of which talents you want when, with Elemental Blast taking up the 3 points in the central block for single target, while Crash Lightning and Crashing Storms fill in for AoE. What is new is that below 20 there is now much more contention for your last points. Primordial Wave still remains an excellent AoE tool paired with Splintered Elements and is a serviceable single target or flexible tool like always, but now with the buff to the entire Ascendance Leaf, they've done the impossible and made that side actually appealing for Elementalist. Especially for single target, dropping Primordial Wave entirely and pathing through there to grab Static Accumulation and Thorim's Invocation is a worthwhile investment due to its pairing with Spenders and the 4-piece. While Elementalist has a heavier focus on Elemental Blast, so it doesn't gain the full-fledged benefit of this, it doesn't really matter. The effects are just good in comparison. When it comes to how Ascendance is played, given there's so few boosts to Storm Strike taken, and how much more cluttered the priority is for Elementalist, it's more of a Maelstrom Surge than a way to throw out Wind Strikes, meaning it doesn't necessarily suffer as much from the Thorim's priming issues that clashes with the 4-piece. It's also why DRE isn't as appealing. You simply don't cast enough Storm Strikes to consistently reach the average uptime to make it worth it. What is, however, a problem is that your Maelstrom economy can become extremely strained trying to keep it on cooldown, alongside playing for the Sundering triple chain lightning windows and judging if you can afford to squeeze in a lightning bolt at all. How this all plays out in reality is harder to guess, so the meta build for 10.1 is a bit more of a mystery, but we'll see as that plays out. AoE remains largely the same, Hailstorm pulls a lot of weight even without as much support from the 4-piece, and Lashing Flames maintenance shows it up for mid-range target counts. Sundering boosts your Primordial Wave windows nicely via the 2-piece if you take it, and gives a follow-up haste window to layer over the mastery and the damage boosts, accentuating its already good burst profile. It can opt into Fire Nova for more AoE, but it's more volatile and physical because of the Roll the Wolves aspect, needing to hit the right boost, and doing so also effectively bricks any frost spawns from elemental spirits, which may lead you to assume Alpha Wolf is better, but at that point, it's better just switching to physical anyway because of the lower synergy from wolves elsewhere on the tree. The build's main benefit is the raw flexibility it brings to the table. It's very easy to grab a variety of talents that suit both situations without much in the way of loss for the other. Most of the strong single target tools have the benefit of also hitting extra targets as well, with only 1 or 2 points either side that switch into the extremely specialized sections. For that fact alone, I don't see much changing in terms of its playability, especially in Mythic Plus where this is extremely desirable and it's looking to get a decent bump in performance for single target, which it's been falling behind thanks to the addition of Ascendance and its arsenal for the more specialized situations. Moving on to physical, or lightning, windy fellow, Mr. Zap, whatever. The same rules for the tree apply here with the color coding on the tree. What's probably instantly noticeable compared to Elementalist is that 1, there's a lot more talent selections open here, and 2, there's a lot more color coding. That's because physical is more of a specializing build that has to make sacrifices. The main core of pathing through the Wind Fury boosts and the center block is maintained, but the center block has some choices here. Swirling goes well with Fire Nova for AoE, but it's harder to fit into a single target build. Storm Flurry is a good flex pick, but it's required for single target, just like Storm's Wrath, so that you can reach elemental weapons and Storm Blast. This all makes a difference from the usual point starvation physical suffers from. Where the bottom section deviates is that Ascendants or DRE are now always taken no matter the situation, and they have significantly more impact regardless of whether it's AoE or single target, bridging that gap between target counts for Mythic Plus that was holding it back on live. There's also more incentive than ever to take 2 points in Frostwitch for AoE to boost up Fire Nova, with Elemental Assault being much more specialised now. In single target, you'll see a lot of parallels to live physical, but with less of a wild swing due to relying less on DRE and simply having much more punchy Maelstrom spenders available. Elemental Blast's gap is less significant compared to Lightning Bolt, though still pronounced, which means that you don't have to lose your entire single target package when trying to spec yourself out with something more Mythic Plus friendly as a mix and match build. You still always want Lava Lash and at least 1 point in Molten Assault for the free Flame Shock maintenance, and likely Ice Strike for a filler, but as such the gameplay loop remains fairly similar. Press Storm Strike a lot and fill with your backup strikes, then use your mountain of spenders due to all the Maelstrom generation. But the highlight has shifted away from desperately fishing for DRE procs and more onto making absolutely sure you manage your Maelstrom correctly. Thanks to static accumulation, there's a huge incentive to play around this properly by reacting to those procs. And really, that's the star talent now, not DRE, which does a lot to change the dynamic of the gameplay loop. In AoE, your Maelstrom economy goes through the roof due to how much you're getting from the core AoE loop that physical has, and the amount of chances you have to trigger static accumulation on your now extremely punchy Chain Lightning casts really brings it forward. Fire Nova shows up the middle with extra bursts of Maelstrom and a hefty amount of damage, especially when overlapped with Wolf buffs, Frostwitch and the 4-piece, and since there isn't that reliance on DRE procs anymore, consistency is just shot way up. There's even a solid argument to flexing a point into Primordial Wave just for the raw damage, or, should you choose to specialise even more, taking the entire Primordial Wave Leaf to focus on Doomwind's uncapped AoE aspect. There's simply a lot more give and take on the tree now for physical that can let you focus more on a specific damage type, and a lot less conflict in things directly pulling away from your resources for one type of damage in exchange for another. It mostly just slots together. In an AoE build as well, since I know this is a concern, your single target doesn't fall off a cliff like it used to because you're taking Fire Nova and have an empty rotation. There's enough in the physical build already to sustain a solid single target block. The overarching theme and rule for these two builds, and something I do expect will carry on for the patch, unless something drastically changes and shifts things up, is that Elementalist is better at generalizing its builds for variable target counts, while Physical is better at specializing to hone in on one damage profile. What that means going forward is they're both much more likely to be used based on reasonable estimates of what's needed in an encounter, rather than one, read Physical, fundamentally being unable to function or react to any varying encounter mechanics, leaving it as a one-trick wonder. So, that's basically my takeaway from the current 10.1 situation. I want to once again reiterate the disclaimer from before. This is speculation, and nothing is certain yet because there is a solid amount of things that have changed that have a lot of unique impacts and implications on the entire gameplay loop, even though it was only a small number of specific changes. Because so much of Enhancement's toolkit is interlinked, mechanical changes, especially ones that shake up build performance relative to each other, can have far-reaching effects. When it comes to performance itself, what's best, where, and how good we are relative to other specs, I simply can't answer that because others have received as much or more changes than us in the process. The one definitive thing I can say though, we did get buffed and we do have a more rounded set of damage profiles, even though we already had some great ones to begin with. Everything about 10.1, from my perspective, is a positive and it's something to look forward to. Does it fix every problem? No. And whether it's enough to make us meta gods who top meters, I don't know. That's for future me to complain about. But what I love about the spec in Dragonflight is still there, but better. And what I dislike the most is becoming less impactful, so it's hard to be a Debbie Downer. Hopefully this gives you a reason to be at least a little bit excited about the spec, and once again, make sure to use the Wowhead and Icy Veins guides on patch launch as they'll be updated, and I'll see you guys in Avarice.